like, and make sure to engage in comments. And share this video to your friends and story lovers. And click on the subscribe button on the screen to subscribe to Inquisco for more real and true stories like this. I never thought I'd hire a male nanny, but after weeks of juggling work, the kids, and a household that seemed to always be teetering on chaos, I finally gave in. Andrew came highly recommended. He had worked for a friend of mine who swore up and down that he was great with kids and trustworthy to a fault. When he showed up for the interview, I was caught off guard. I'd expected someone older, more like the grandpa-type babysitter I'd seen in movies. Instead, Andrew was in his late 20s, tall with an easygoing smile that instantly put the kids at ease. He got the job partly because we were desperate, and partly because I could see how much the kids adored him. He didn't just supervise them. He played with them, made them laugh, and somehow managed to get them to eat their vegetables without a fight. My husband, Greg, was away a lot for work, and Andrew filled a gap in our lives that I hadn't even realized was there. It started innocently enough, small conversations in the kitchen while he packed snacks for the kids, quick laughs over the ridiculous antics of my youngest Ella, who had taken to calling him Andy. I didn't notice at first how much I began to look forward to those moments when it was just the two of us. He had this way of really listening when I talked, something Greg didn't always do. One evening after the kids had gone to bed, Andrew stayed a little longer to help clean up after Ella's birthday party. The house was quiet, the kind of stillness that feels rare when you have 3 kids under 10. I handed him a glass of lemonade, and we sat at the kitchen table chatting about everything and nothing. "You're amazing with them," I said, gesturing toward the stairs where the kids were sleeping. "I don't know how you do it." He smiled a little shyly. "They make it easy. You've raised good kids." I felt a flush of warmth at the compliment, but I quickly brushed it off. It was nothing, just polite conversation. Or so I told myself, but later that night, as I lay in bed, Greg snoring softly beside me, I found myself replaying the way Andrew had looked at me. When he said those words the next day, things felt different, not outwardly. Andrew was as professional as ever, and I kept things casual, focusing on my work and the kids. But there was this undercurrent I couldn't ignore, a subtle shift in the way I was suddenly hyper-aware of his presence. It wasn't just me, or at least I didn't think it was. There were moments when our eyes would meet across the room, lingering a second too long, a brush of his hand when he passed me the baby's bottle. These tiny, fleeting touches shouldn't have meant anything, but they did, at least to me. One afternoon, as I was sorting laundry in the living room, Andrew came in from the backyard where he'd been playing with the kids. He stood there wiping sweat from his forehead, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. His t-shirt clung to his chest, damp from the heat, and I felt ridiculous for noticing. "Need any help?" he asked, his voice breaking through my thoughts. "No, I'm good," I said quickly, my cheeks burning as I focused on the pile of socks in front of me. But as he turned to go, I caught him glancing back. Just for a second, it was nothing. Or maybe it wasn't after that glance. Everything seemed to shift. Not in any overt way. Andrew was still Andrew, and I was still trying to be the busy, reliable mom, but the tension was undeniable. Wasn't spoken, and it certainly wasn't planned, but it was there, lingering in the spaces where we crossed paths. The day after our quiet talk in the living room, the weather was unusually warm for the season. The kids begged to go to the park, and Andrew offered to take them. At first I stayed back, planning to use the time to catch up on work. But something pulled me outside. I threw on a light jacket and followed them. When I arrived, the kids were running wild on the playground. their laughter echoing through the crisp afternoon air. Andrew was standing nearby watching them with a small, content smile. I walked over and he turned at the sound of my footsteps. "Decided to join us?" he asked. His tone light, but his eyes lingered on mine a moment too long. "Figured I could use the fresh air," I replied, trying to sound casual as I looked out at the kids. We ended up sitting on a bench a little away from the playground, where we could still see the children but have some space. The conversation started easily enough about the kids. The weather, random little things. But then he turned to me with that steady, thoughtful gaze of his. "You've been quiet today," he said. "I've just had a lot on my mind," I replied, brushing a loose strand of hair from my face. He nodded, leaning back against the bench. "Anything you want to talk about?" For a moment, I considered opening up, telling him about the growing weight I felt every day, balancing work, motherhood, and a marriage that felt more like a partnership of convenience than anything else. But I caught myself. He wasn't the person I should confide in, even if it felt so natural to talk to him. "I'm fine," I said, instead offering him a small smile. Really, he didn't press, but the silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt like he understood, even without me saying a word. The kids eventually ran over, breathless and red-faced, begging for snacks. Andrew stood, pulling a bottle of water from his bag and handing it to Ella. "Here you go, kiddo," he said, ruffling her hair. As I watched him interact with them, I felt that familiar pang of warmth. He was so good with them, patient, kind and attentive, in a way that made me feel both grateful and envious. When the kids wandered back to the playground, Andrew turned to me again. "You're an amazing mom, you know that." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "I don't always feel like it." "Well, you are," he said, his tone firm. "The way you handle everything." It's impressive. His words caught me off guard. And for a moment, I didn't know what to say. I looked away, focusing on the trees swaying gently in the breeze. But I could feel his eyes on me. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. The rest of the afternoon passed without incident. But as we walked back to the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted again. The tension was still there, unspoken but undeniable. Later that evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I stepped outside to sit on the porch. The air was cool now, and the faint chirping of crickets filled the quiet. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, closing my eyes and letting the stillness wash over me. I didn't hear Andrew approach until he spoke. "Mind if I join you?" I opened my eyes, startled but nodded. He sat on the step below me, leaning back against the railing. "It's peaceful out here," he said. Glancing up at the sky, "It is," I agreed, my voice barely above a whisper. We sat in silence for a while, the space between us feeling both too close and too far. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "I hope I'm not overstepping," he said, "but you seem like you could use a break from everything." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at him. Really looked at him and saw the concern in his eyes. He wasn't just saying it to be polite. He meant it. "Maybe," I said finally, my voice trembling slightly, "but life doesn't really give breaks, does it?" He smiled faintly, turning his gaze back to the yard. "No, I guess it doesn't." For a moment, the air between us felt charged, like a thread pulling tighter and tighter. I could feel it in the way he shifted slightly closer, his shoulder brushing against the blanket draped around me. But just as quickly, he stood, breaking the spell. "I should probably head in," he set his voice back to its usual easy tone. I nodded, clutching the blanket tighter around me. "Good night, Andrew." "Good night," he replied, his gaze lingering on me for just a second longer, before he disappeared into the house. As I sat there alone under the stars, I couldn't ignore the ache in my chest, the mix of relief and something else I wasn't ready to name. The next few days passed in a haze of avoidance and stolen glances. I tried to busy myself with chores, errands and the kids' endless energy, but it was impossible to ignore the way Andrew's presence seemed to fill every room he entered. It was careful, respectful, and professional. But the air between us felt electric, like something was waiting to ignite. Then came the evening that changed everything. Greg had called to say he wouldn't be home until late again, and the kids were asleep upstairs. I was in the backyard tidying up after dinner when Andrew stepped out of the house. He was holding 2 mugs of tea, his silhouette framed by the soft light spilling from the kitchen. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing me one of the mugs. "Thanks," I murmured, taking it from him. My fingers brushed his, and the brief contact sent a jolt through me. He sat down on the edge of the patio, and I joined him, the cool night air wrapping around us. We didn't speak at first, just sipped our tea in silence. But the quiet wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt heavy with unspoken words. After a while, he broke the silence. "You've been distant," he said, his voice low but steady. I glanced at him, my heart pounding. "I've just had a lot on my mind." "Is it me?" he asked. His eyes meeting mine, there was no accusation in his tone, only a quiet vulnerability that made it hard to look away. I hesitated, gripping the mug tighter. "It's not you, it's me." "This situation," he nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I get it, I really do. I don't want to make things harder for you." "You're not," I said quickly. And he looked up again, his expression searching. The words hung between us, unspoken but understood. I knew I should stand up, walk back into the house, and put an end to whatever this was. But I couldn't. Instead, I stayed, and when he shifted slightly closer, I didn't move away. His knee brushed against mine, and the contact sent a wave of warmth through me. "I don't want to overstep," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the sound of the crickets. "You haven't," I whispered, even though I knew we were dangerously close to a line we couldn't uncross. He reached up, hesitating for a moment, before brushing a stray strand of hair from my face. The touch was so gentle, so deliberate, that it felt like the world had stopped spinning. For a heartbeat, we just looked at each other, the tension between us crackling like a live wire. I could feel his breath warm and unsteady, and my own heart thundering in my chest. Then, the sound of a car door slamming in the distance shattered the moment. We both jolted, pulling away as if the spell had been broken. I started, but the words wouldn't come. Andrew stood, running a hand through his hair. "I should go," he said, his voice tight. I nodded, clutching the mug in my hands as if it could steady me. "Good night, Andrew." "Good night," he said, his eyes lingering on mine for one last, fleeting second before he disappeared into the house. I stayed outside for a long time after he left, staring up at the stars and trying to make sense of the storm of emotions swirling inside me. Relief, regret, longing, all tangled together in a way that left me breathless. When I finally went inside, the house was quiet. Andrew had already left, and the kids were still fast asleep. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom, closing the door softly behind me. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop replaying the way he had looked at me, the way he had almost but not quite closed the distance between us. It would have been so easy to let it happen, to let myself fall into something that felt as terrifying as it did. Inevitable, but it hadn't happened. And that was the thing about almost they lingered. Haunted and whispered of what could have been. The next morning when Andrew arrived, everything was back to normal. He greeted the kids with his usual warmth, and we barely exchanged more than a few polite words. But when our eyes met briefly across the kitchen, I saw it, the quiet understanding, the shared memory of a moment that had come so close to changing everything. And then he looked away, and so did I. Because some lines once crossed can never be uncrossed. Click on the subscribe button on the screen to subscribe to Inquisco for more real and true stories like this.